He first noticed the piano when he was a young boy sitting quietly at the back of a small community hall, waiting for his mother to finish her cleaning shift. The hall smelled of wood and polish, and every sound seemed to echo softly across the empty space. In the corner stood an old upright piano, its surface worn, and its keys slightly yellowed, yet something about it felt alive to him. One evening, a woman came in after hours and began to play. She did not perform for an audience, she played as if speaking herself, and the sound filled the hall with warmth. The boy felt something shift inside him, a calm he had never known before. And from that moment, the piano became more than an object, it became a feeling he carried with him. His name was Elias, and he grew up in a modest neighborhood where money was limited, but effort was constant. His mother worked long hours, and his father had left early in his life, leaving behind silence and questions. Music became a quiet companion during those years. Elias would find ways to sit near pianos whenever he could in churches, schools, or community spaces. He never touched the keys at first. He only listened, believing the sound belonged to someone else, someone more worthy, someone more confident. Yet each time he heard the piano, he felt understood in a way words never managed. As Elias grew older, responsibility arrived early. He helped his mother work part-time jobs and learned to manage disappointment without complaint. School was something he attended faithfully, but without passion. He often felt invisible among louder voices and bigger dreams. Yet inside him, music continued to grow quietly, shaping his emotions and offering relief when the world felt heavy. He saved small amounts of money and eventually bought a cheap keyboard with several broken keys. He placed it near his bed and played softly at night, teaching himself through repetition and patience. He did not dream of fame or applause. He played because the piano allowed him to breathe freely. It gave structure to his thoughts and meaning to moments that otherwise felt empty. He learned how different sounds could express sadness, hope, gratitude, and peace without needing explanation. The piano became a place where he could be honest without fear of judgment, and that honesty shaped his character in subtle ways, making him more attentive and compassionate toward others. As an adult, Elias worked as a caretaker at a local cultural center. His role kept him behind the scenes, preparing rooms, arranging chairs, and maintaining order. He liked the quiet of early mornings and late evenings, when the building was nearly empty. Those were the moments he felt closest to himself. Sometimes, after finishing his tasks, he would sit at the grand piano in the main hall, just for a few minutes, playing gently and stopping before anyone could hear. He believed his music was meant for solitude, not display. One afternoon, an elderly man entered the hall unexpectedly and listened without interrupting. When Elias finished, he apologized and said he did not realize anyone was there. The man smiled and thanked him, saying the music reminded him of his wife who had passed away years earlier. That moment stayed with Elias because it revealed something he had never considered, that the piano could reach others, even when played quietly without intention. That realization unsettled and inspired him at the same time. From then on, Elias began to notice how people responded to piano music, even in passing, how a few notes could soften tense conversations, slow hurried footsteps, and bring strangers into shared stillness. He saw music bring comfort to those carrying grief and joy to those who felt forgotten. The piano did not ask questions or judge, it simply offered presence, and that presence touched hearts in ways he could not fully explain. Elias started to volunteer at a small care home, playing piano during visiting hours. At first, he kept his sessions brief, unsure how his music would be received. But residents gathered quietly, listening. Some closed their eyes, some held hands, some smiled. Without speaking, staff members noticed changes in mood and atmosphere during those moments. And Elias realized the piano was doing something meaningful, something real and grounded in everyday life. He did not change his life suddenly or dramatically. He continued working and living simply. But he allowed music to step into the open, no longer hidden behind closed doors. He learned that the enchanting sound of the piano was not about perfection or performance. It was about sincerity and connection. It carried the power to touch hearts because it spoke directly to human experience without demand or expectation. Elias understood that this power came from listening as much as playing, from being present rather than impressive. The piano became his way of offering something honest to the world, something shaped by struggle, patience, and quiet hope. And though he did not know where this path would lead, he felt certain that the music would continue to guide him gently toward purpose and understanding. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As Elias continued visiting the care home, he became more aware of how deeply people responded to the piano. Even when they did not speak about it, residents who rarely left their rooms began arriving early to sit near the instrument. Some brought small photos or letters and held them quietly while listening. Elias noticed these details and treated each session with care, choosing gentle pieces and allowing silence when it felt right. He learned to watch faces rather than focus only on sound, because expression often revealed more than words. One woman named Margaret always sat near the window and never looked directly at him. She kept her hands folded and her posture straight, as if holding something together. Elias played for weeks before she spoke to him one afternoon after a simple melody. She said the music reminded her of dancing with her husband in their kitchen when they were young. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with memory. Elias listened without interrupting and nodded with respect. That brief exchange taught him that the piano could unlock stories people thought they had lost. Outside the care home, life remained ordinary. Elias continued his caretaker job and lived in a small apartment near the center of town. His days were structured, And his needs were simple. He avoided attention and rarely spoke about his music to others, because he did not want it to become something performative. He valued sincerity and believed music lost its power when it chased approval instead of connection. At the cultural center where he worked, Elias sometimes overheard visitors talking about stress, loneliness, or loss. Without realizing he was listening, those conversations stayed with him and influenced how he played. He began selecting music that carried warmth and openness rather than complexity. He wanted people to feel welcome rather than impressed. And this approach slowly shaped his style into something uniquely his own. One evening during a community event, the main pianist fell ill just before the program was scheduled to begin. Staff members rushed quietly, unsure what to do. Elias was preparing chairs nearby when the coordinator approached him and asked if he could help fill the time with background music. He hesitated, feeling unprepared. Yet he agreed because the request felt genuine, not demanding. He walked to the piano and began playing softly as people entered and found their seats. The room changed almost immediately. Conversations softened and movement slowed. Guests who had arrived tense from the day began to relax without realizing why. Elias played steadily, keeping the music supportive rather than central. When the event ended, several people thanked him, saying the atmosphere felt different, calmer, and more welcoming. Elias accepted the thanks politely and returned to his duties. But inside, he felt a deeper understanding of the piano purpose. Over the following weeks, the coordinator asked him to play again during gatherings and exhibitions, always as background, always with respect. Elias agreed each time, setting clear limits to protect his balance. He did not want music to replace his work or consume his identity. He wanted it to remain an offering rather than an obligation. This clarity helped him stay grounded. Elias also began to notice changes within himself. He felt more open, more patient, and more connected to others. Even outside music, conversations felt easier and listening felt natural. He realized that the piano had taught him how to be present without rushing to fix or impress. This awareness strengthened his relationships and brought a quiet confidence he had never known before. One afternoon, a young boy approached him after a session at the care home and asked how the piano worked. Elias knelt beside him and explained gently, letting the boy press a few keys and hear the sounds form together. The boy smiled widely and asked if anyone could learn. Elias said yes, if they were willing to listen and practice. That moment stayed with him because it reflected his own beginning, curious, unsure, and quietly hopeful. As more people experienced his playing, Elias faced a choice. He could continue hiding behind circumstance or allow music to grow naturally into something shared. He chose the second path, not with ambition, but with intention. He did not seek stages or recognition. He sought spaces where music could serve real human needs, comfort, reflection, and connection. The piano remained his anchor, not because it defined him, but because it allowed him to express what words could not. Through sound, he found a way to meet others where they were, without judgment and without expectation, and that ability shaped his sense of purpose. Elias understood now that the enchanting sound of the piano was not magic in the traditional sense. It was powerful because it created space for feeling and memory. It touched hearts by honoring the quiet parts of life that often went unseen. And as he continued forward, he carried this understanding with humility, knowing that the true strength of music lay in how gently it entered the lives of others and stayed with them long after the sound faded. As Elias continued offering music in quiet spaces, he began to understand that the piano was changing not only the people who listened, but also the way he moved through the world. His days felt more connected, and his awareness sharpened. He noticed small things more clearly, such as how people paused when a melody began, or how their breathing slowed without effort. This sensitivity shaped his choices and made him more intentional about when and how he played. At the care home, the sessions became a steady part of the week. Residents looked forward to them, and staff adjusted schedules to allow people to attend. Elias arrived early each time, setting the bench and wiping the keys with care. He treated the piano as a shared space rather than a stage, and this attitude created trust. People felt safe listening without needing to respond or perform. Gratitude. Some residents slept peacefully during the music, others hummed quietly, and some simply held the moment in stillness. One afternoon, a man named Thomas, who rarely joined group activities, arrived late and stood near the doorway. He listened silently for several minutes before taking a seat. After the session, he approached Elias and said he had not heard piano music since his daughter moved away years ago. He said the sound made him feel closer to her, even though they rarely spoke. Now Elias listened and thanked him for sharing, and understood again that music could bridge distances that words often fail to cross. Outside these sessions, Elias' life remained modest and grounded. He still worked full-time and managed his expenses carefully. He did not seek attention, and he avoided talking about his music unless asked directly. He believed that letting the work speak quietly was more honest than explaining it. He spent evenings practicing gently, focusing on tone and touch rather than speed or complexity. He wanted the sound to feel open and human rather than technical. At the cultural center, more people began to notice how the atmosphere changed when Elias played during events. Organizers commented on the calm energy. Guests stayed longer and spoke more softly without being asked. This effect surprised Elias because he had not set out to influence mood, yet the piano seemed to invite a different pace and presence. He accepted this role, cautiously ensuring that music remained supportive rather than central. One evening after a small exhibition, a visitor approached him and said the piano made the space feel welcoming rather than intimidating. The visitor explained that galleries often felt cold, but that evening felt warm and personal. Elias thanked him and reflected on how sound could shape perception in subtle ways. This realization deepened his respect for the responsibility that came with playing, even quietly. As weeks passed, Elias began receiving invitations to play in other settings such as libraries, hospitals, and community centers. Each request was considered carefully. He accepted only those that aligned with his intention to serve rather than impress. He declined opportunities that felt rushed or overly promotional, not out of fear, but out of clarity. He wanted music to remain grounded in sincerity. These choices were not always easy. There were moments when he questioned whether he was limiting himself or missing opportunities, yet each time he listened inwardly and found that peace followed restraint rather than expansion. This understanding reinforced his belief that purpose did not require constant growth. It required consistency and alignment. Elias also noticed how music influenced his conversations. He became a better listener, allowing others to speak without interruption. He recognized emotional cues more easily and responded with patience rather than advice. People felt comfortable sharing around him, perhaps because his presence mirrored the openness of his playing. This shift strengthened his relationships and created deeper trust in both personal and professional settings. One day, a fellow staff member at the center confided that hearing Elias play during breaks helped her manage anxiety. She said the music felt grounding and reminded her to slow down. Elias acknowledged her words and felt humbled because he had not known the impact extended beyond listeners who stopped to watch. This awareness reminded him that music traveled farther than intention, and that care mattered even in unseen moments. At home, Elias reflected often on his childhood and how music had quietly supported him through uncertainty. He realized that he was now offering the same support to others without needing to explain or justify it. The piano had become a shared language that met people where they were and allowed them to feel without pressure. This realization strengthened his sense of responsibility and gratitude. He began journaling, occasionally writing not about goals or plans, but about moments, reactions, and small shifts in energy. These reflections helped him stay grounded and avoid drifting into ego or expectation. He wanted to remain present rather than predictive, trusting that the path would reveal itself through continued attention and honesty. As more people encountered his music, Elias felt a growing confidence not rooted in approval, but in understanding. He knew why he played and what he hoped to offer. That clarity protected him from doubt and distraction. He no longer compared himself to others or questioned the value of quiet work. He understood that touching hearts did not require volume or spotlight. Through these experiences, Elias came to see the piano as both instrument and teacher. It taught him how to listen, how to wait, and how to offer without attachment. Its enchanting sound carried power, not because it demanded attention, but because it invited presence, and that invitation continued to shape his life gently and steadily, guiding him toward deeper connection and purpose. As Elias settled further into this way of living, he began to notice how deeply consistency mattered more than intensity. His presence at the care home, the cultural center, and other quiet spaces created a sense of reliability. People trusted that the music would be there without demand, and without surprise. This trust allowed listeners to relax fully because nothing was expected of them in return. Elias valued this deeply because it mirrored what he had needed as a child, a place where something good could exist without conditions. The invitations to play continued to arrive slowly and thoughtfully. Some came from hospital staff who had heard about his work and wondered if music could help ease tension in waiting areas. Elias visited once to observe before agreeing. He watched how families sat with worry and how silence often felt heavy. He returned a week later with his keyboard and played gently, keeping volume low and tone warm. The effect was subtle but real. Conversations softened, children calmed, and a few people closed their eyes. Brief moments of rest. Elias understood then that the piano could hold space for people who had no words left. He remained careful not to overwhelm himself. He scheduled sessions with clear limits and protected time for rest, practice, and daily life. He believed that exhaustion would dull the sincerity of his playing, and he refused to let that happen. Some evenings he chose not to play at all. Instead, he walked through the neighborhood, listening to the sounds of the city and letting his thoughts settle. These pauses helped him maintain balance and prevented the music from becoming a burden. At the cultural center, Elias was asked to help guide a small group of volunteers interested in creating more welcoming environments. He did not teach music in that setting. Instead, he spoke about listening, patience, and awareness. He explained how sound affected mood and how silence could be just as important. The group responded with interest and implemented small changes, adjusting lighting, spacing, and background noise. Elias saw how his quiet approach extended beyond the piano, influencing how people shared spaces. During this time, Elias also faced moments of uncertainty. There were days when he questioned whether his work truly mattered or if it was too small to make a lasting difference. These thoughts usually surfaced when he felt tired or isolated rather than when he was present with others. He learned to recognize them as signals to rest rather than reasons to change course. By honoring these signals, he avoided burnout and preserved his clarity. One afternoon at the care home, a new resident arrived visibly distressed, and withdrawn staff asked Elias if he could play during the transition. He chose a familiar gentle melody and kept the tempo slow. The resident sat quietly at first, then gradually relaxed his shoulders. After the session, he thanked Elias softly and said the music made the place feel less unfamiliar. That simple response reaffirmed Elias' belief that the piano did not need to solve problems, it only needed to offer steadiness. Elias also began mentoring a young volunteer who showed interest in music, but lacked confidence. He did not focus on technique. Instead, he encouraged listening, patience, and daily practice without pressure. They played simple pieces together and talked about fear, expectation, and self-trust. Elias shared his own doubts, openly showing that growth did not eliminate uncertainty. It taught one how to live alongside it. This honesty helped the young volunteer find his footing and strengthened Elias' understanding of his own journey. Financially, Elias remained cautious. He accepted modest compensation where appropriate and declined offers that promised exposure instead of fairness. He believed that respect included valuing time and energy, and he modeled this principle consistently. Some organizers were surprised by his boundaries, but many appreciated the clarity and responded with professionalism. This approach reinforced Elias' belief that quiet firmness could reshape interactions without conflict. At home, Elias' life felt fuller yet still simple. He cooked meals, read in the evenings, and played the piano privately when inspiration came. He did not feel pressure to document or share these moments. They belonged to him alone and provided renewal. He reflected often on how different his relationship with music had become, not louder or grander, but more integrated into who he was. Friends and colleagues sometimes asked why he did not pursue larger stages or recognition. Elias answered honestly, saying that his purpose was not scale, but depth. He wanted to touch hearts one at a time rather than impress crowds. This explanation felt true and grounded, and it guided his decisions without regret. He had learned that fulfillment did not come from being seen by many, but from being present with. As Elias continued forward, he noticed how his calm presence influenced others beyond music. People spoke more openly around him and trusted him with personal stories. He listened carefully, offering empathy rather than solutions. This way of being mirrored the role of the piano in his life, a steady companion that held emotion without judgment. He recognized that the enchanting sound of the piano had shaped not only his actions, but his character. Through all of this, Elias remained humble and attentive. He knew that the power of music was not something he owned. It flowed through him and required care, respect, and restraint. He treated each opportunity as a responsibility rather than a reward, and this mindset protected the sincerity of his work and his inner peace. By the end of this period, Elias no longer questioned the value of his path. He saw its impact in small gestures, calmer rooms, softened expressions, and moments of shared stillness. He understood that touching hearts did not require grand gestures, only honesty, patience, and the courage to remain gentle in a world that often rushed past such things. As Elias moved through this stage of his life, he began to understand that the piano was no longer something separate from him. It had become woven into how he understood people, time, and emotion. He noticed that even on days when he did not play, his awareness remained shaped by listening. He paid attention to tone, pauses, and unspoken feelings in conversations, and this sensitivity helped him respond with care rather than reaction. At the care home, his presence became familiar and reassuring. Residents greeted him with quiet smiles and small gestures rather than words. Some no longer remembered his name, but they recognized the feeling the music brought. And that was enough for Elias. He learned not to correct or explain because connection did not require clarity. It required presence. He chose pieces that felt gentle and steady, allowing people to enter and leave the moment freely without obligation. One afternoon, a resident who had rarely responded to music reached out and rested her hand lightly on the piano. As Elias played, the touch was brief but deliberate, and it moved him deeply because it showed that the sound had reached beyond memory into feeling. He continued playing without changing tempo, honoring the moment without drawing attention to it. Afterward, a nurse told him that the woman had been unresponsive for weeks, and that this was the first time she had shown engagement. Elias listened quietly, understanding again that the power of the piano worked in ways that could not be predicted or measured. Outside these sessions, Elias continued to live modestly. He kept his job at the cultural center and took pride in maintaining the space. He believed that caring for environments mattered just as much as filling them with sound. His coworkers noticed his calm approach and often sought him out for quiet conversation. He listened without trying to guide or advise, and people left those conversations feeling lighter without knowing exactly why. At the center, Elias was invited to help plan a series of small community evenings focused on calm reflection. Rather than performance, he contributed ideas about lighting, seating, and sound, encouraging simplicity and warmth. The events were modest and unadvertised, yet those who attended often stayed longer than planned, sitting quietly and sharing soft conversation. Afterward, Elias observed how music combined with thoughtful space could slow time and create connection without spectacle. He also continued receiving invitations to play in different settings, some from private individuals who wanted music for intimate gatherings, Elias accepted only a few, choosing those that felt aligned with his intention to serve rather than impress. He made it clear that his playing was meant to support atmosphere rather than become the focus. And those who understood this welcomed him with respect. This mutual understanding preserved the sincerity of each experience. There were moments when Elias questioned whether he was limiting himself by avoiding larger opportunities. He saw others pursue stages recognition and growth through expansion. And he wondered if his path was too narrow, yet each time he imagined stepping into louder spaces, he felt a quiet resistance within him, not fear but misalignment. He learned to trust that feeling, recognizing it as guidance rather than hesitation. At home, Elias spent more time reflecting through writing. He noted moments where music had shifted a room or softened a person. Without being acknowledged, he wrote about silence, and how it shaped sound, and about restraint, and how it preserved meaning. These reflections were not meant for sharing, they helped him stay grounded and reminded him why he chose this path when doubts surfaced. One evening after a long day, Elias returned home feeling tired and uncertain. He sat at the piano and played slowly without structure, allowing his hands to move freely. The music felt heavy at first, then gradually softened as he released tension. When he finished, he felt restored rather than drained, and he realized that the piano served him as much as he served others through it. This mutual relationship sustained his commitment. The following week, a local teacher invited Elias to speak with a small group of students about music and emotion. He agreed on the condition that he would not be presented as a performer or expert. He spoke simply about listening, patience, and honesty. He explained that music mattered because it allowed people to feel without explanation. The students listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions, and Elias left feeling that the message had landed without force. As his understanding deepened, Elias became more comfortable with uncertainty. He no longer needed to define outcomes or set long-term goals. He trusted that consistent attention and care would guide his path more reliably than ambition. He measured progress not in opportunities gained, but in alignment maintained. This perspective brought peace and reduced the restlessness he once carried. The piano continued to reveal its power to touch hearts, not through grand moments, but through quiet consistency. Elias saw it in softened expressions, in shared silence, and in the way people lingered just a little longer. When music filled the space, he understood that enchantment did not come from complexity, it came from sincerity. And that sincerity required patience, humility, and restraint. By embracing this understanding, Elias found fulfillment that did not depend on recognition. He felt useful, present, and connected. And that was enough. He did not know what the next stage would bring, but he felt ready to meet it with the same openness that had guided him this far, trusting that the piano would continue to speak where words fell short, and that its gentle power would remain a steady force in his life. As Elias entered this next phase of his journey, he felt a deeper sense of responsibility, not pressure, but awareness. He understood that the piano had become a quiet presence in many lives, and that required care. He became more deliberate about how he showed up and how he conserved his energy, because he knew that sincerity could fade if he allowed exhaustion to lead his choices. His days were calm but full, and he learned to respect limits without guilt. Respect limits without guilt. The care home continued to be one of the most meaningful places for him. Residents recognized his presence even when memory failed them. They responded to tone, rhythm, and gentleness more than names or explanations. Elias learned to adapt his playing to the room. Some days required slower melodies and longer silences. Other days welcomed brighter harmonies. He listened carefully before touching the keys, allowing the space to guide him rather than habit. This attentiveness deepened the connection between sound and feeling. One afternoon, a staff member shared that families had noticed changes in their loved ones after music sessions: calmer moods, better sleep, and fewer moments of agitation. Elias received the information quietly without pride. He reminded himself that the music was not a solution, it was a companion, and he believed companionship mattered most when it did not promise change but offered steadiness. At the cultural center, Elias was invited to support a new initiative focused on well-being for staff and visitors. The idea was simple: to create moments of calm during busy days. Elias suggested brief piano sessions during transitions rather than full programs. The leadership agreed, and soon short intervals of music became part of the daily rhythm. Employees paused, breathed, and returned to work with softened focus. Elias observed these shifts and understood how small, consistent gestures could influence an entire environment. During this time, Elias also faced personal challenges. There were days when loneliness surfaced quietly, especially in the evenings when the city felt distant. And still, instead of resisting those feelings, he allowed them space and often turned to the piano not to escape, but to acknowledge what was present. The music during those moments was slower and more reflective, and it helped him process emotions without becoming overwhelmed. He learned that vulnerability did not weaken his work, it strengthened it. He continued journaling as a way to stay grounded, writing about moments that felt meaningful rather than impressive. These reflections helped him avoid comparison and kept his focus on alignment. He wrote about the importance of choosing depth over expansion, and how restraint protected sincerity. These writings were personal anchors, reminding him of why he chose this path when external voices suggested otherwise. Elias also began guiding others more intentionally. A few volunteers and young musicians sought his perspective not on technique, but on purpose. He spoke openly about doubt fatigue and the temptation to chase recognition. He emphasized listening, patience, and self-trust. Rather than achievement, these conversations felt reciprocal and reminded him that teaching was not about answers but shared inquiry. One evening, Elias was invited to play at a small gathering for caregivers and social workers. The room was modest, and the audience tired. He played gently and kept the session brief. Afterwards, several people expressed gratitude, saying the music helped them release tension they had been carrying silently. Elias felt humbled because the group was accustomed to giving care rather than receiving it, and the piano had offered them a moment of rest. Financial stability remained modest, but reliable. Elias continued to live simply, saving carefully and avoiding unnecessary commitments. He believed that freedom came from fewer obligations rather than greater income. This mindset allowed him to say no without fear and yes with clarity. He trusted that sustainability mattered more than speed, and that consistency built resilience over time. As months passed, Elias noticed how his identity had shifted quietly. He no longer introduced himself by job or role. He simply spoke his name and allowed others to discover the rest naturally. This felt honest and unburdened. He was no longer defined by what he did, but by how he lived, and this brought a calm confidence that did not require validation. He reflected often on how the enchanting sound of the piano worked not through volume or drama, but through presence and intention. He saw its power in moments of shared stillness, and in the way people softened when expectations fell away. This understanding guided every choice he made and kept him aligned with his values. By the end of this period, Elias felt steady and prepared, not for a specific outcome, but for continued listening. He trusted that the path would unfold through attention rather than ambition, and that the piano would continue to serve as both guide and companion. He knew that touching hearts required patience, humility, and consistency, and he was committed to offering all three without condition. As Elias moved further along this path, he began to notice a quiet confidence settling into his life. It was not the kind that announced itself or demanded recognition, but the kind that showed up in how he stood, how he listened, and how he made decisions without hesitation. He trusted his inner sense more than outside opinions, and this trust gave him steadiness even when circumstances felt uncertain. People around him began to rely on his presence, not because he promised solutions, but because he brought calm. Teachers at the cultural center asked for his input when creating new programs. Caregivers at the care home requested his sessions during difficult transitions, and volunteers sought his guidance when they felt overwhelmed. Elias responded thoughtfully, never rushing to fill silence or offer answers. He believed that presence itself was often enough, and that belief shaped how others felt around him. One evening, after a long session at the care home, Elias stayed behind to help staff rearrange chairs and tidy the room. A nurse paused and thanked him, saying that on the days he played, the entire floor felt lighter. The words were simple, but they stayed with him because they confirmed something he had sensed, but never assumed: that the piano changed not only moments but environments, and that this change came from consistency rather than intensity. Elias continued to decline opportunities that felt misaligned, even when they promised wider exposure. Some people questioned his choices and suggested he was holding himself back. But Elias no longer felt the need to explain. He understood that his path was shaped by intention, not fear, and that depth required boundaries. He measured success by alignment rather than expansion, and that measure never failed him. His personal life reflected the same clarity. He maintained simple routines, cooked meals, walked often, and spent evenings reading or playing softly for himself. These private moments were essential because they restored the part of him that offered care to others. He no longer felt guilt for protecting this time because he understood that giving without renewal eventually led to emptiness. During this period, Elias faced a moment of unexpected loss when an elderly resident he had played for regularly passed away. The news affected him more than he anticipated. He attended a small remembrance gathering where family members spoke about comfort, presence, and kindness. One person mentioned the piano and how it brought peace in the final weeks. Elias listened quietly, holding the weight of grief and gratitude together. He understood then that the impact of music often revealed itself fully only in absence. That experience deepened his sense of responsibility and meaning. He became even more attentive to how he played, and where he played, he did not see the piano as a tool, but as a shared space where people could rest, reflect, and feel without explanation. This understanding shaped his choices and strengthened his commitment to sincerity. Elias also noticed a change in how he related to uncertainty. He no longer rushed to define the future or worry about where things were heading. He trusted that consistent care would guide him better than long-term plans. This trust allowed him to remain open to what emerged without losing his grounding. He learned to meet uncertainty with curiosity rather than control. A younger volunteer once asked him how he knew when to say yes or no. Elias answered, simply saying that the body often knows before the mind does, and that stillness helped him hear that knowing. This advice was not dramatic, but it was honest, and it reflected how he lived rather than what he taught. As his quiet influence grew, Elias remained mindful of humility. He reminded himself often that the piano did not belong to him, and that the effect it created was shaped by those who listened as much as by those who played. This perspective kept his ego in check and preserved the purity of his work. He believed that enchantment faded when ownership replaced service. One afternoon, Elias was invited to sit in on a planning meeting for a new wellness space. The group discussed design, lighting, and sound, and Elias spoke about the importance of softness and rhythm. He explained how gentle repetition created safety, and how silence allowed people to arrive fully. His suggestions were received with interest and later implemented, reinforcing his belief that listening was a transferable skill not limited to music. Through all of this, Elias felt deeply connected to his younger self, the quiet boy who once listened from the back of a hall. He realized that he was now offering to others what he had once needed without knowing it. This realization brought a sense of completion and compassion for his past rather than regret. As the months continued, Elias felt grounded and whole. His life was not free from challenge, but it was free from confusion. He knew who he was and why he played, and that knowledge carried him forward without strain. The piano continued to sound not as a performance, but as an invitation, and people continued to accept that invitation in their own ways. By this stage, Elias understood that touching hearts was not a goal to be achieved, but a result of living with care, patience, and honesty. The enchanting sound of the piano flowed naturally from those qualities, and as long as he honored them, the music would continue to find its way into the quiet spaces where it was most needed. As Elias entered the later chapter of his journey, he felt a deep sense of calm that did not depend on circumstances. His life had not become larger in the way many people measured success, yet it had become fuller and more meaningful. Each day carried intention and balance, and he no longer questioned whether his path was enough. He knew it was true to who he was, and that truth guided every choice he made. The piano remained a steady presence in his life, not demanding attention, but offering companionship. He continued playing in quiet spaces, care homes, community rooms, libraries, and small gatherings, always with the same approach: listening first, then responding through sound. People came and went, and not everyone spoke, but Elias understood that impact was not always visible. Sometimes it lived in softened shoulders, slower breathing, or a moment of shared stillness that stayed with someone long after the music. And over time, Elias noticed how people who once came only to listen began creating their own small rituals. Some arrived early to sit near the piano, others stayed afterward just to be in the space. He welcomed this without comment, believing that meaning grew best when it was not explained or directed. The piano had become a meeting place for emotion, memory, and rest, and Elias treated it with the same respect one would offer a sacred room. His work at the cultural center continued, but gradually shifted as new responsibilities were shared with others. Elias reduced his hours slightly, allowing more time for rest and reflection. This decision was made slowly, and without urgency. He trained others carefully and left each task complete, believing that transitions should be gentle rather than abrupt. This care preserved trust and allowed him to step back without loss or resentment. In his personal life, Elias felt increasingly at peace with simplicity. He walked, often cooked thoughtfully, and spent evenings reading or playing quietly for himself. These private moments mattered because they reminded him that music did not exist only for others. It also sustained him when no one was watching. This balance kept his relationship with the piano honest and free from obligation. Occasionally, people still asked why he did not pursue larger stages, recognition, or recordings. Elias answered kindly, saying that he had found what he needed, and that growth did not always mean expansion. This response was not defensive, it was rooted in clarity. He understood that fulfillment came from alignment, not accumulation, and he had no desire to trade depth for visibility. One meaningful moment came when a former resident family invited him to a small remembrance gathering. They shared stories of comfort, presence, and moments of peace, and one person spoke about the piano and how it made difficult days gentler. Elias listened quietly, holding gratitude and humility together. He understood then that the true measure of his work lived in moments he might never witness fully, and that was enough. Elias also continued guiding younger volunteers and musicians, not through instruction, but through example. He showed them how to listen, how to rest, and how to protect sincerity in a world that often rushed toward noise. He spoke openly about doubt and fatigue, explaining that these were not signs of failure, but invitations to slow down. These conversations felt meaningful because they were grounded in lived experience rather than advice. As seasons changed, Elias reflected often on how the piano had shaped his life, not by offering escape, but by teaching presence. It had shown him how to stay with feeling without needing to fix it, and how to offer something gentle without expecting return. This understanding extended beyond music into every relationship and responsibility he carried. One evening after a long day, Elias sat alone at the piano and played softly, letting the sound move without structure. The music felt warm, reflective, and complete. When he finished, he did not feel the need to hold on to the moment. He simply closed the keyboard and sat in stillness, understanding that the value of the music lived in the experience, not in preservation. He thought about the young boy he once was listening quietly from the back of a hall and realized that the longing he felt then had been answered not through achievement, but through service. He had become someone who created the kind of space he once needed, and that realization brought a sense of quiet completion. Elias knew that life would continue to change and that uncertainty would always be present, but he trusted his ability to respond with care. He no longer feared the future because he had learned how to listen deeply and act honestly. Those skills would guide him wherever he went. The enchanting sound of the piano remained a constant thread, not because it demanded attention, but because it reflected how Elias lived with patience, humility, and presence. It touched hearts because it was offered without condition, and because it honored the quiet truths people carried inside. As he moved forward, Elias did not seek to define the ending of his story. He understood that stories shaped by care rarely ended. They continued in small moments, shared silence, and gentle sound. He was content knowing that as long as he listened and played with sincerity, the piano would continue to do what it had always done: create connection, offer comfort, and remind people of their own humanity in a world that often forgot how powerful gentleness could be.